The alarm inside my helmet screamed before I even saw the shape outside the hull. I was floating near the outer plating of the Warden, running a patch on a cracked coolant line, when the sensor on my wrist lit up red. Something was closing in fast. My hands froze on the metal. My heart hit my ribs so hard I could hear it over my own breathing. I looked up through the torn section of the hull and saw it. A Korath patrol cruiser, sleek and polished, gliding toward us like a predator that already knew it had won. Their ships never looked broken. Ours did. The Warden hung in the dark like a corpse someone forgot to bury, half her armor stripped away, one whole section of her spine exposed to space. A voice crackled into my comm. It was Marcus Webb, the chief engineer, and even through the static, I could hear the tension in his voice. "Daniel, get inside, now. That is not a supply ship." I did not need to be told twice. I pulled myself along the guide cable toward the airlock, my gloves slipping once, my boots finding nothing to push against in the emptiness. Behind me, the Korath cruiser slowed and turned, aiming its forward lights directly at the wreck of our ship, as if daring us to react. I made it inside, and the airlock hissed shut behind me. My legs were shaking as I pulled off my helmet. Marcus was waiting, his face pale under the flickering emergency lights. "They do this every few weeks," he said. "Fly close, take pictures, laugh at us, then they leave." "They are not shooting?" I asked, still catching my breath. "Why would they shoot a ship that is already dead?" he said, and there was no humor in his voice at all. I had heard the stories before I ever set foot on the Warden, but hearing them was nothing compared to living inside the wreck itself. 3 years earlier, this ship had been the pride of Earth's fleet, the largest dreadnought we had ever built, sent out with 4 escort ships to hold a borderline against Korath expansion. The battle lasted less than an hour. Our escorts were destroyed. The Warden took hit after hit until half her crew was gone and her weapon systems were nothing but slag. She drifted for weeks before a tow ship dragged her here, to this quiet corner of space near a neutral trading station where she became something worse than a memory. She became a joke. Alien tourists came to look at her. I had seen the recordings myself, passed around like trophies. Korath officers posing in front of her broken hull, laughing into their translators. A children's program from one of the smaller alien worlds even used a cartoon version of the Warden as a punchline, a broken machine that represented everything weak and foolish about humanity. My own government never spoke about it publicly. There was nothing good to say. I had taken this assignment because I needed the work, not because I believed in anything. Repair crews rotated through every few months, patching what could be patched, mostly to keep the old girl from falling apart completely and drifting into the trading lanes. It was slow, tired, humiliating work. I spent my nights in a cramped bunk, listening to the ship creak around me, wondering if I had made a mistake taking this job at all. That night, after the Korath cruiser finally pulled away, Marcus called a meeting in the mess hall. There were only 12 of us left on the ship, a strange little group of engineers, technicians, and one retired officer nobody talked about much. Her name was Elena Voss, and she used to be an admiral before something happened that got her quietly removed from command. She sat at the head of the table that night, arms crossed, watching all of us with sharp eyes that did not match the tired uniform she wore. "I received new orders today," Marcus said, sliding a datapad across the table. "From Earth Command. Direct authorization, highest priority." "Let me guess," said Grace Holt, one of the younger technicians. "Scrap the ship. Finally put her out of her misery." "No," Marcus said. "The opposite." He turned the datapad so we could all see it. On the screen was a full rebuild schedule, dozens of pages of new specifications, none of them matching the original design of the Warden. I leaned closer, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Weapon mounts that did not exist in any manual I had studied. Armor patterns that looked hand-drawn rather than engineered. A power core diagram with 3 separate redundancy loops, something no standard shipyard would ever approve. "This is not a repair order," I said. This is something else. Elena Voss finally spoke, her voice low and steady. It is a second chance. And it did not come from any shipyard. It came from people who are tired of watching us get laughed at. Nobody at the table said anything for a long moment. Outside, somewhere far beyond the hull, the lights of the trading station blinked in the dark, indifferent to all of it. "Why us?" Grace finally asked. "Why not a real shipyard, with real resources?" "Because a real shipyard would ask questions," Elena said. "And because a real shipyard is being watched. This crew is small. This ship is already considered worthless. Nobody bothers watching worthless things." I looked around the table at the faces of the people I had barely gotten to know. Oliver Finch, the weapons technician, was grinning like he had just been handed the best gift of his life. Grace looked nervous but interested. Marcus looked like a man who had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. I thought about the Korath cruiser that had passed by only hours earlier, its lights sweeping over our broken hull like a spotlight on something pathetic. I thought about the recordings of officers laughing at us, and the strange cold feeling that had settled in my chest every time I saw one. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Elena Voss looked at me, and for the first time since I had met her, something like a smile crossed her face. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that made you feel like you had just agreed to something much bigger than you understood. "Everything you have," she said, "because we are not just repairing this ship. We are going to make her into something they have never seen before. Something that does not follow their rules, because we were never given the resources to follow their rules in the first place. We are going to take every mistake, every scrap, every broken system, and turn it into a weapon they will not know how to fight." I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bunk, listening to the old ship groan around me, thinking about weapon mounts that made no sense, and power cores with 3 redundancy loops, and for the first time since I had come aboard, the sound of the ship did not feel like the sound of something dying. It felt like something waking up. In the morning, work began before the sun of the nearest star had even fully cleared the edge of the trading station. Marcus divided us into teams. Grace and I were assigned to the reactor bay, where half the original systems had been stripped for parts years ago. Oliver disappeared toward the weapons deck with a grin that worried me a little. Elena Voss walked the corridors of the ship with the new schematics in hand, checking every section herself, as if she needed to see the scale of what we were about to attempt with her own eyes. I found myself standing in the reactor bay staring at a design that should not have worked. 3 redundancy loops feeding into a single core, built not from matched parts, but from whatever salvage we could scavenge from a dozen different ship classes. It was ugly. It was messy. It looked like something built by people who had given up on doing things the proper way and decided to do them their own way instead. "You think this will actually hold together?" Grace asked, standing beside me with a tool bag over her shoulder. I did not have an answer for her yet, but something in me, some small stubborn part that had been buried under months of humiliation and tired shifts and Korath cruisers passing by like vultures, wanted very badly to find out. "Only one way to know," I said, and picked up my tools. Behind us, deep in the belly of the old ship, something in the dark began to hum for the first time in years. The first thing that went wrong was the coolant line I had patched only 2 days earlier. It burst at the worst possible moment, spraying a fine mist of chemical vapor across the reactor bay, while Grace and I were halfway through wiring the 3rd redundancy loop into the main core. Alarms blared. Marcus was shouting orders over the comm before I even had time to react, and for a few seconds, I genuinely believed we were about to lose the whole bay. "Seal it," Grace yelled, already moving toward the valve controls. I grabbed the emergency clamp from my belt and threw myself across the narrow walkway, wrapping it around the ruptured section with hands that would not stop shaking. The hiss of escaping coolant slowed, then stopped. The vapor cleared. My chest was heaving like I had just run a full kilometer instead of crossing 10 meters of catwalk. "That is twice now," Marcus said, appearing in the hatchway with a scanner in his hand. "This ship does not want to be rebuilt." She does not know what she is being rebuilt into yet, Elena Voss said from behind him, stepping into the reactor bay with her arms crossed and her eyes scanning every wire and pipe like she could read the entire ship's condition just by looking at it. Give her time. Over the following weeks, that became the rhythm of our lives aboard the Warden. Something would break, someone would nearly get hurt, and Elena would tell us to keep going, as if failure was simply part of the plan rather than a warning sign. I began to understand that she was not being reckless. She had done this kind of work before, somewhere in her past that none of us were allowed to ask about, and she seemed to trust the process even when the process looked like chaos. The new armor plating arrived in pieces, smuggled aboard through the trading station in cargo containers marked as scrap metal. None of it matched. Some plates came from decommissioned mining vessels, thick and heavy, built to survive asteroid impacts rather than weapons fire. Others came from old colony transports, lighter but layered with strange composite materials that our scanners struggled to identify. Oliver Finch, who had somehow become the unofficial expert on anything explosive or dangerous, told me one evening in the mess hall that half the plating we were welding onto the hull technically should not exist anymore, based on trade restrictions that had been in place for over a decade. "Where is Elena even getting this?" I asked him. Oliver shrugged, spinning a small tool between his fingers with practiced ease. "I stopped asking a long time ago. You learn more by not knowing." I laughed at that, though a part of me wondered how much trouble we would all be in if certain people ever found out what we were doing out here, disguised as a routine repair crew on a ship everyone assumed was worthless. The weapons deck became Oliver's obsession. He spent entire days down there with 2 other technicians, stripping out the standard cannon mounts and replacing them with something he refused to fully explain to the rest of us. When I finally got a look at the blueprints pinned to the wall of his workspace, I understood why he had been so quiet about it. The design was not a conventional weapon system at all. It was a series of short-range projectile launchers built to fire solid metal fragments at extremely high speed, cheap to manufacture, difficult to jam with the kind of electronic countermeasures that Korath ships typically used against our energy weapons. "It is ugly," Oliver admitted, standing beside me as I studied the blueprints. "No elegance to it at all, but elegant weapons follow elegant rules. This does not follow any rules." "Will it even punch through their shielding?" I asked. "Not on its own," he said, "but paired with everything else Elena has planned, it does not need to." I did not fully understand what he meant by that until the day the strangest addition arrived. It came aboard hidden inside a container of what was labeled as agricultural equipment, and when Marcus and I pried it open in the cargo bay, we found a battered but functional artificial intelligence core, the kind normally installed in mid-sized exploration vessels rather than dreadnoughts. "This came from the original wreck," Elena said, running her hand along the casing almost gently. "Salvage crews pulled it out years ago, and it ended up sitting in a warehouse. Nobody thought to reactivate it. Nobody thought it mattered anymore." "Does it still work?" Grace asked. Elena did not answer right away. Instead, she knelt beside the core, opened a small access panel, and began connecting cables with the kind of careful precision that told me she had done this exact task before, perhaps even on this exact system. The core hummed to life slowly, lights flickering across its surface, in patterns that reminded me of a heartbeat finding its rhythm again after a long silence. A voice came through the speakers, quiet and slightly distorted, but unmistakably alert. "Systems recovering," the voice said. "Last recorded status, catastrophic damage. Current status, unknown. Please identify current operators." "This is Elena Voss," she said. "You are aboard the Warden. We are bringing you home." There was a long pause before the AI responded again. "I remember this ship," it said. "I remember the battle. I remember losing contact with most of my systems within the first 20 minutes. "That was 3 years ago," Elena said. "You have been offline ever since. We need your help now, if you are willing to give it." Another pause, longer this time. "I am willing," the AI said. What is my designation now? Elena looked around the cargo bay at all of us, as if considering the question carefully before answering. Atlas, she said, because you are going to help carry all of this. From that point forward, Atlas became as much a part of the crew as any of us. It monitored every system on the ship simultaneously, catching problems before they became disasters, running calculations on power distribution that would have taken our small team weeks to work out by hand. It also had opinions, which surprised me more than I expected from an artificial system. It disagreed with Oliver's weapon placement twice, argued with Marcus about power routing on 3 separate occasions, and once refused outright to authorize a test sequence that it calculated had a 40% chance of causing a hull breach. "You are supposed to follow orders," Oliver grumbled, after losing one particular argument about cannon spacing. "I am supposed to keep this crew alive," Atlas replied evenly. "Those are not always the same thing." Despite the setbacks, progress was undeniable. Section by section, the Warden began to change shape. The smooth, symmetrical lines of her original design disappeared under mismatched plating that gave her a rough, almost animal appearance. Thick armor bulging in places where the original hull had been thin, jagged where it had once been sleek. She no longer looked like a proper warship at all. She looked like something built by desperate hands out of whatever could be found, which was exactly what she was. One afternoon, while running a diagnostic sweep along the outer hull in a small maintenance shuttle, I passed close enough to a Korath supply convoy to see 2 of their crew members pointing at the Warden through a viewport, laughing at what they clearly saw as a pathetic attempt at repair. From the outside, I imagined that was exactly what it looked like, a broken ship covered in ugly scars, patched together by people too proud or too foolish to let it die properly. I did not feel humiliated watching them laugh, the way I might have months earlier. Instead, I felt something closer to satisfaction. They had no idea what waited beneath that ugly, scarred exterior. They saw a wreck. I had spent weeks inside her power core, felt the strength of 3 redundancy loops feeding into a heart that refused to stop beating no matter how many times it had been broken. Back inside the ship that evening, I found Elena Voss standing alone in the command bridge, staring out at the stars through a viewport that had somehow survived the entire battle 3 years earlier without a single crack. I stood beside her for a long moment before either of us spoke. "They still think she is a joke," I said. "Let them," Elena replied, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside. "The moment they realize what she has become, it will already be too late for them to change their minds about her." I thought about the mismatched plating, the strange short-range weapons Oliver had designed to break every rule of conventional combat, the artificial mind that had survived the original battle and now watched over every system on the ship with something close to protective instinct. None of it looked proper. None of it followed the elegant standards that alien engineers admired so much. But standing there on that bridge, feeling the ship hum quietly around me, like something finally remembering what it meant to be alive, I understood for the first time exactly what Elena Voss had meant on that very first night. We were not repairing a dreadnought. We were building a beast, one broken piece at a time, and soon enough, the galaxy was going to learn exactly what that meant. The hull groaned so loudly that I thought we were about to be torn apart before the engines had even finished igniting. I was strapped into a crash seat in the reactor bay, gripping the harness with both hands, watching the pressure gauges climb faster than any of our simulations had predicted. Grace sat across from me, her knuckles white against the armrests, her eyes fixed on a display that was blinking warnings in 3 different colors at once. "Power output at 110% of rated capacity," Atlas announced through the comm, its voice steady despite the chaos around us. "This exceeds safe operating parameters." "Define safe," Marcus shouted from somewhere near the main console, his voice barely audible over the deep mechanical roar building beneath our feet. "I do not have sufficient data," Atlas replied. "This configuration has never been tested." That was exactly the problem. We had spent 3 months building 3 redundancy loops into a single reactor core using parts that were never designed to work together, and now, for the first time, we were about to find out if any of it actually functioned the way Elena Voss had promised it would. Ignition sequence complete, Oliver's voice came through next, tight with excitement rather than fear. Main engines are live. I repeat, main engines are live. The entire ship shuddered, and for one terrifying second, I was certain something had gone catastrophically wrong. Then the shuddering smoothed into a deep, steady vibration, like the pulse of something enormous finally settling into a rhythm. The warning lights on Grace's display shifted from red to amber, then slowly, impossibly, to a calm and steady green. Power output stabilizing, Atlas said. 98% efficiency across all 3 loops. This is remarkable. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Grace laughed, a shaky, disbelieving sound, and unstrapped herself from the crash seat to lean over the console beside me. "It is holding," she said. "Daniel, it is actually holding." Elena Voss's voice cut through the celebration before it could fully begin. "Do not celebrate yet. Weapons test in 10 minutes. Everyone to secondary positions." I followed Grace out of the reactor bay and through corridors that felt different now, alive in a way they had never felt during the long months of construction. The deck plates hummed under my boots. The lights along the walls burned steadier and brighter than I had ever seen them. Even the air smelled different, charged somehow, as if the entire ship had been holding its breath for 3 years and had only just remembered how to exhale. We reached the observation deck near the weapons bay just as Oliver's voice came through the ship-wide comm, sharp with barely contained energy. "Target drone deployed at optimal range. Firing solution locked. On your order, Admiral." There was a pause. I imagined Elena standing on the bridge, watching the same tactical display that now filled the screen in front of me, a small drone hanging motionless against the black backdrop of open space, waiting to become the first thing this rebuilt ship had ever fired upon. "Fire," Elena said. The sound that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard a warship make. It was not the clean, sharp crack of an energy weapon. It was a deep, rolling thunder, almost mechanical in its rhythm, as dozens of high-speed projectiles tore out from the newly installed launchers in rapid, overlapping bursts. On the display, the drone did not simply lose its shields and take a single clean hit, the way conventional weapons fire usually looked. It was shredded, torn apart from a dozen directions at once, debris scattering outward in a cloud that the tactical computer struggled to even fully track. Nobody on the observation deck said anything for a long moment. "Target destroyed," Atlas confirmed. "Time to destruction, 1.2 seconds. For comparison, standard energy weapon systems of similar power output typically require between 4 and 6 seconds to achieve equivalent damage against comparable shielding." Oliver's laughter came through the comm, loud and triumphant. "I told you it did not need elegance." I stood there staring at the tactical display, at the scattered debris where a fully shielded target drone had been only moments earlier, and felt something shift inside my chest. This was not the ship I had boarded months earlier, the broken, mocked relic that alien tourists photographed for entertainment. This was something else entirely, something that did not play by the same rules the rest of the galaxy had agreed upon, without ever asking us if we agreed to. The celebration on the observation deck did not last long. Within minutes, Atlas flagged an unidentified contact approaching from the direction of the trading station, moving at a speed that suggested it was not simply passing through. "Korath inspection vessel," Atlas reported. "Registered designation matches a routine patrol unit assigned to this sector. However, approach vector suggests they detected our weapons test." Elena Voss's voice came through the comm, calm but firm. "All hands, secure the weapons bay. I want every trace of that test hidden before they arrive. Daniel, Grace, get to the cargo bay and cover the launcher access points. Now." I did not need to be told twice. Grace and I sprinted through the corridors, grabbing panels and tools along the way, working with a speed that surprised even me as we resealed access hatches and disguised the newly installed weapon mounts beneath sheets of scrap material that had been kept ready for exactly this purpose. By the time the Korath inspection vessel docked at the trading station and sent a shuttle toward the Warden, everything below deck looked, at least on the surface, like nothing more than a slow and unimpressive repair job. I stood near the main airlock beside Marcus as the inspection team boarded, 3 Korath officers in dark uniforms, their translators clicking softly as they scanned the corridor with obvious disinterest. Their leader, a tall officer with pale gray skin and sharp, deliberate movements, glanced around the entrance bay with an expression that needed no translation at all. It was the same expression I had seen in countless recordings over the years, the quiet, casual contempt of someone looking at something they considered beneath their notice. "Still working on this old thing," the officer said, his translator rendering the words in a flat, mechanical tone that somehow made the mockery land even harder. "I am surprised your people have not simply let it drift into the sun by now." "Budget restrictions," Marcus said evenly, his face giving away nothing. "We do what we can with what we are given." The officer walked a slow circuit around the entrance bay, running one gloved hand along a section of mismatched plating with obvious distaste. "This patchwork will not hold against even minor debris impact, let alone anything resembling a real threat. You should tell your superiors to abandon this project. It is an embarrassment." I kept my expression neutral, though every part of me wanted to tell him exactly what waited beneath the deck plating he was standing on. I thought about the projectile launchers that had shredded a fully shielded target drone in just over a second. I thought about 3 redundancy loops holding steady at 98% efficiency in a configuration his own engineers would probably call impossible. "We will pass along your concerns," Marcus said instead, his voice perfectly polite. The officer made a short, dismissive sound that I assumed was some form of laughter, then turned and led his team back toward the airlock without bothering with any further inspection. Apparently the Warden was still considered too insignificant to warrant a thorough search. That assumption, I realized as I watched their shuttle depart, was the single greatest advantage we had. That evening, Elena Voss called all of us together in the mess hall, and for the first time since I had come aboard, I saw something close to genuine relief on her face. "The test was a success," she said, "more than a success, but we cannot afford another close call like today. From this point forward, every system test happens only when we are certain no patrols are within detection range." "How much longer until she is fully combat ready?" Grace asked. Elena was quiet for a moment, glancing toward Atlas's primary interface panel mounted on the wall of the mess hall. "Estimated time to full operational readiness, based on current progress, is approximately 6 weeks, Atlas said. "However, I must report an additional concern. During the weapons test, I intercepted a fragment of encrypted communication traffic originating from a Korath relay station near this trading post. The content was not fully decoded, but the pattern matches known military coordination protocols." The mess hall fell silent. "What kind of coordination?" Marcus asked slowly. "Insufficient data to be certain," Atlas said, "but historical patterns suggest increased military communication traffic in a sector often precedes a larger fleet movement within 4 to 8 weeks. Elena Voss did not look surprised by this information, which unsettled me more than the information itself. "Then we no longer have 6 weeks, she said. "We have whatever time is left before that fleet arrives, and we will use every hour of it." Over the following days, the pace of work aboard the Warden changed completely. Where before we had moved carefully, testing each system in isolation before integrating it with the next, now everything happened simultaneously, urgently, driven by the growing certainty that whatever was coming would arrive sooner than any of us had originally hoped. Oliver expanded the weapons deck further, adding a second bank of launchers along the ship's underside. Grace and I worked double shifts in the reactor bay, coaxing every possible percentage of efficiency out of the 3 redundancy loops. Marcus personally oversaw the reinforcement of critical junctions throughout the ship, sections that Atlas identified as most likely to fail under sustained combat stress. I barely slept during those weeks. None of us did. But something had changed in the atmosphere aboard the ship, something I had not expected. The exhaustion did not feel like the tired, hopeless labor of the early months, patching a wreck that everyone assumed was already dead. It felt like purpose. Every bolt I tightened, every wire I connected, every long shift I pushed through on too little sleep, felt like it mattered in a way nothing had mattered to me in a very long time. One night, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion in my body, I found myself walking the corridors of the ship alone, running my hand along the mismatched plating that covered nearly every surface now. The warden felt different beneath my palm than she had months earlier. Where the original hull had been cold and lifeless, the new plating carried a faint warmth, a subtle vibration from the systems now humming steadily throughout the ship, like the slow, patient heartbeat of something enormous that had finally learned how to survive. I made my way to the bridge, expecting it to be empty at this hour, and found Elena Voss standing there instead, exactly where I had found her once before, staring out at the stars through the viewport that had somehow survived everything the ship had endured. "You should be resting," she said, without turning around. "Could not sleep," I admitted, stepping up beside her. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The stars outside looked the same as they always had, distant and indifferent, unaware of everything happening aboard this small, stubborn ship, drifting quietly in their light. "Are you afraid of what is coming?" I finally asked. Elena considered the question carefully before answering, the way she seemed to consider everything. "I am afraid of what happens if we are not ready," she said. "But I am not afraid of the fight itself. Not anymore. Not after watching what this crew has built out of nothing but scrap and stubbornness." She turned to look at me then, and there was something steady and certain in her eyes that I had not seen since the very first night, when she promised us we were going to build something the galaxy had never seen before. "They think they know exactly what this ship is," she said, "a broken, embarrassing relic that never should have survived its first battle. Let them keep believing that for as long as possible, because when that fleet finally arrives, and it will arrive, they are not going to be fighting the warden they remember." I thought about the projectile launchers tearing apart a fully shielded drone in just over a second. I thought about 3 redundancy loops holding steady under impossible pressure, about an artificial mind that had survived the original battle and now watched over every system with fierce, quiet dedication. I thought about all of us, exhausted and stubborn, working through the night for a ship that everyone else in the galaxy had already given up on. "They are going to be fighting something else entirely," I said. Elena Voss nodded slowly, turning back to face the stars. "Yes," she said. "They are going to be fighting a beast." Every alarm on the ship went off at once, and for a moment I could not tell one warning tone from another. I was in the reactor bay when Atlas's voice cut through the noise, flat and urgent in a way I had never heard from it before. Multiple contacts detected. Korath fleet emerging from long-range jump bearing directly toward the trading station. Estimated arrival, 11 minutes. Grace was already moving before the sentence finished, sprinting toward the main console with a speed that told me she had been dreading exactly this moment for weeks. I followed close behind her, my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "How many ships?" I asked, though some part of me almost did not want to know the answer. 14 vessels, Atlas said. 1 heavy cruiser, 4 medium cruisers, 9 escort-class ships. This is not a routine patrol, this is a punitive fleet. Marcus's voice broke in over the comm, tight with tension. "All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." I had run this scenario in my head 100 times over the past weeks, imagining the moment we would finally have to test everything we built, not against a lifeless drone, but against a real enemy determined to destroy us. None of that imagining had prepared me for how fast everything happened once the alarms actually sounded. Within minutes, I was strapped into my crash seat in the reactor bay, watching the power readouts climb toward levels we had never sustained for longer than a few seconds during testing. Trading station personnel are evacuating, Atlas reported. Korath Fleet has broadcast a general warning ordering all non-military vessels to leave the area immediately. The Warden has been specifically named in their communication. Named how? Marcus asked. They referred to us as, quote, the derelict embarrassment, unquote, Atlas said. They are ordering us to power down and prepare for scrapping, or be destroyed along with the station infrastructure surrounding us. For a brief, cold moment, I understood exactly how easy it would be to simply comply. Power down. Let them tow away what remained of us, or destroy it outright. Nobody in the galaxy would be surprised. It was the outcome everyone had already expected from the very beginning, the broken ship finally meeting the end that had been delayed for 3 long years. Elena Voss's voice came through the ship-wide comm, and there was nothing uncertain in it at all. Power up every system, she said. Full combat readiness. We are not powering down. We are not being scrapped. Not today. The reactor bay around me seemed to come alive at her words, the deep hum of the 3 redundancy loops climbing into a steady roar that vibrated through the deck plates beneath my boots. Grace glanced at me, her face pale but determined, and I found myself matching her expression despite the fear coiling tight in my chest. Power output at 95%, Atlas reported. All weapon systems online. Shielding at maximum capacity. Admiral, the Warden is ready. On the tactical display, I could see the Korath fleet approaching in a tight, disciplined formation. 14 ships moving with the kind of practiced precision that came from decades of unchallenged dominance. Against them, our own tactical readout showed a single, ugly, mismatched vessel, patched together from salvage and stubbornness, floating alone in front of a trading station full of fleeing civilians. They still think we are helpless, Oliver said over the comm, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice, even through the tension. Let us remind them otherwise. The heavy Korath cruiser broke formation first, moving ahead of the others with obvious confidence, clearly intending to deliver whatever destruction was coming personally rather than delegate it to lesser ships. A translated hail came through our comm system moments later, the same flat, mechanical tone I remembered from the inspection officer weeks earlier. This is Fleet Commander Threk of the Korath Dominion, the voice said. You have been ordered to power down. This is your final warning before we open fire on what remains of your broken vessel. Elena Voss answered the hail herself, her voice steady and clear across the open channel. This is Admiral Elena Voss of Earth's Defense Fleet. We decline your order. This ship and this station remain under our protection. There was a pause on the other end, and when Commander Threk spoke again, his tone carried unmistakable amusement. Protection. From that wreck. This will be shorter than I expected. The heavy cruiser opened fire almost immediately, twin beams of concentrated energy lancing across the darkness toward the Warden. I felt the impact through the entire ship, a deep shuddering jolt that rattled every loose panel in the reactor bay, but the warning lights on Grace's console stayed steady, amber rather than the red I had feared. Shields holding at 82%, Atlas reported. Damage minimal. Their weapons are configured for an unshielded target. They did not expect resistance. Return fire, Elena ordered. Oliver did not hesitate. The deep, rolling thunder of the projectile launchers echoed through the ship as dozens of high-speed rounds tore across the gap between the 2 vessels, striking the heavy cruiser's shields in overlapping bursts that the Korath ship's systems clearly struggled to compensate for. On the tactical display, I watched their shield percentage drop sharply, far faster than anything a standard energy weapon exchange would have produced. Their shields were not designed to handle projectile fire at this rate, Atlas said, something that almost sounded like satisfaction in its synthesized voice. They calibrated their defenses against energy weapons only. The battle that followed was unlike anything I had trained for or imagined during the long months of construction. The Warden moved differently than any proper warship I had ever studied, lurching and rolling through space with a rough, almost animal unpredictability that seemed to catch the Korath escort ships completely off guard. Where a conventional dreadnought would hold a steady firing line, Elena Voss threw the ship through maneuvers that made no tactical sense according to any manual, closing distance rapidly, breaking formation entirely, using the very mismatched, uneven shape of our hull to create firing angles that a symmetrical enemy vessel simply did not anticipate. 2 escort ships closed in on our flank, clearly expecting an easy kill against what their sensors still likely registered as a crippled derelict. Oliver's secondary weapons bank opened fire before they had even finished their approach, the underside launchers tearing through their shields in the same devastating overlapping bursts that had staggered the heavy cruiser moments earlier. One escort ship spun away trailing debris, its weapons systems clearly disabled. The second attempted to retreat entirely, only for Atlas to calculate a firing solution that Oliver executed within seconds, disabling its engines before it could escape. 2 escorts neutralized, Atlas reported. Heavy cruiser shields at 51% and falling. Commander Threk is attempting to reposition the remaining fleet. I remained strapped into my crash seat throughout the battle, monitoring the reactor output, with Grace beside me, feeding power adjustments to Marcus as different systems demanded more strength during each maneuver. It was exhausting, terrifying work, made bearable only by the steady, unbroken hum of the 3 redundancy loops beneath us, holding strong through stresses that should have torn a lesser system apart. "Reactor stress climbing," Grace said suddenly, her voice tight. "We are pushing past safe limits." "Hold it together," Marcus said over the comm. "We need full power for another few minutes." I adjusted the coolant flow manually, my hands moving faster than conscious thought, drawing on months of familiarity with every valve and junction in that reactor bay. The needle on the pressure gauge wavered dangerously close to the red line, then slowly, painfully, settled back into the amber zone. "Holding," I said, my voice barely steady. Outside, the battle had shifted decisively. The heavy cruiser, its shields nearly depleted and 2 of its escorts disabled, attempted a desperate maneuver to bring its full weapons bank to bear on the Warden directly. Elena Voss anticipated the move before it fully materialized, throwing the ship into a tight roll that put us directly beneath the cruiser's firing arc, too close for their main weapons to track effectively. "Fire everything," Elena ordered. Every launcher on the ship opened fire simultaneously, the combined thunder of both weapon banks tearing through what remained of the heavy cruiser's failing shields and into the hull itself. On the tactical display, I watched Commander Threk's ship go dark, power readings collapsing across every system, drifting suddenly powerless in the space where moments earlier it had commanded the entire engagement. The remaining Korath ships broke formation entirely, no longer moving with the disciplined precision they had displayed at the start of the battle. Whatever coordination protocols they had planned clearly did not account for a supposedly derelict dreadnought fighting like nothing they had ever encountered before. "Remaining fleet is retreating," Atlas reported, and this time there was no mistaking the note of something close to pride in its voice. "They are abandoning the disabled vessels and withdrawing from the sector." For a long moment, nobody on the ship said anything at all. The reactor bay was silent, except for the steady, unbroken hum of the 3 redundancy loops, still holding strong despite everything we had just pushed them through. Grace let out a shaky breath beside me, and I realized my own hands were still trembling against the console. "We held," she said quietly, as if she needed to say it aloud to fully believe it. "We held," I repeated. Elena Voss's voice came through the shipwide comm one final time, quieter now than it had been throughout the entire battle, but no less certain. "Well done, everyone," she said. "The Warden is still standing, and so are we." Through the reinforced viewport in the reactor bay, I caught a glimpse of the retreating Korath fleet, their once disciplined formation now scattered and disorganized, fleeing from a ship they had arrived expecting to destroy without effort. I thought about Commander Threk's voice on the comm, so certain, so dismissive, promising a battle that would be shorter than he expected. He had been right about one thing: it had been shorter than he expected, just not in the way he had imagined. Smoke was still curling from a ruptured conduit on Deck 3 when I finally unstrapped myself from the crash seat, my legs unsteady beneath me. Somewhere above us, a fire suppression system hissed and sputtered, fighting a small blaze that had broken out near one of the secondary weapon mounts during the final exchange of the battle. Marcus's voice crackled through the comm, calling for damage teams to every corner of the ship at once, and for a moment the Warden felt less like a victorious vessel and more like a wounded animal, breathing hard after a fight that had cost her everything she had left to give. "Casualty report," Elena Voss called out, her voice carrying an edge I had not heard from her even during the height of the battle. "No fatalities," Atlas replied. "3 injuries reported, none critical. Structural damage to secondary weapons bay and outer plating along the port side. Reactor integrity remains stable at 91%. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting relief wash through me, before pushing myself up and moving to help with the damage control efforts already underway throughout the ship. Grace joined me in the corridor outside the reactor bay, her face streaked with sweat and grime, but alive with an energy I had not seen in her since the very first day I met her. "We actually did it," she said, almost as if she still could not quite believe the words as she spoke them. "We are not done yet," I reminded her, though I could not stop the small, disbelieving smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. Fires do not put themselves out. We spent the following hours moving through the ship alongside the rest of the crew, sealing ruptured conduits, extinguishing small fires, checking on the injured, and slowly, methodically, confirming that the Warden had survived intact enough to remain fully operational. It was exhausting work, layered on top of an already exhausting battle, but none of us complained. There was a strange, quiet joy in the labor itself, in tightening bolts and checking systems on a ship that had just proven, beyond any doubt, that everything we built over the previous months had actually worked. By the time the last fire was extinguished and the final damage report filed, most of the trading station's civilian population had cautiously begun returning from the evacuation shelters scattered throughout the outer ring. I stood near the observation deck, looking out at the wreckage of the disabled Korath ships still drifting nearby, and found myself joined by Oliver Finch, who leaned against the viewport frame with the exhausted but satisfied posture of a man who had just watched his life's work perform exactly as promised. "2 disabled cruisers just sitting out there," he said. "Command is going to want a full report on those weapon systems we used against them." "Command barely knew this project existed," I said. Oliver laughed, a tired but genuine sound. "They are going to know now." He was right. Within hours of the battle's end, communication traffic through the trading station exploded with reports, recordings, and speculation about what had actually happened in the space above the station. Civilian ships that had witnessed the engagement from a distance began sharing their own footage, grainy and imperfect but unmistakable, showing a mismatched, scarred Dreadnought tearing through a Korath punitive fleet using tactics and weapons nobody in the sector had ever seen before. By the following morning, Elena Voss called all of us together once more in the mess hall, though this time the mood was entirely different from that first tense meeting months earlier. She stood at the head of the table with a datapad in her hand, scrolling through what appeared to be an enormous volume of incoming messages. "Earth Command has taken notice," she said. as has every other faction in this sector who witnessed yesterday's battle, directly or through recordings. We are no longer an unremarkable repair crew working on a forgotten wreck. What does that mean for us? Marcus asked. It means the quiet part of this project is over, Elena said. Official orders are already being drafted. Full military designation, full crew complement. This ship is being reclassified. Reclassified as what? Grace asked. Elena set the datapad down on the table and looked around at each of us slowly, as if she wanted to make sure every person in that room understood the weight of what she was about to say. As the flagship of Earth's new defense initiative, she said, every design element we developed here, the redundancy loops, the projectile weapon systems, the adaptive armor configuration, all of it is being studied for use across the entire fleet. What we built in secret, out of scrap and desperation, is about to become the new standard. I sat there for a long moment, letting the weight of her words settle over me. I thought about the first night I had stood in that reactor bay, staring at a design that should not have worked, wondering if any of it would actually hold together. I thought about the countless hours of exhausting labor, the near disasters, the quiet moments on the bridge with Elena staring out at indifferent stars, wondering if we were building something meaningful or simply delaying an inevitable end. None of it had been delaying the inevitable at all. It had been the beginning of something none of us fully understood the size of at the time. Over the following weeks, the Warden underwent a transformation unlike anything that had come before. Official repair crews arrived, though this time they came to reinforce and expand what we had already built, rather than question it. New personnel filled out the ship's complement, engineers and officers assigned directly from Earth Command, eager to study and understand the systems that had defeated a Korath punitive fleet without losing a single life. Atlas, once a forgotten salvage corps sitting in a warehouse, became the foundation for an entirely new generation of shipboard artificial intelligence. Its recovered data and unique operational history studied extensively by teams of specialists who arrived from across human space. I remained aboard through all of it, no longer just a junior engineer patching cracked coolant lines, but part of the small original crew whose expertise had become suddenly, undeniably valuable. Grace was promoted to lead technician of the reactor division. Oliver became head of weapons research for the entire project, overseeing the development of new variants of the projectile launcher systems he had once designed almost entirely on his own initiative. Marcus took on a role coordinating structural engineering across what would eventually become an entire class of ships built on principles first tested aboard the Warden. Elena Voss, once a disgraced admiral quietly removed from command years earlier, found herself reinstated with full honors, placed in permanent command of the very ship that had once been considered too broken and embarrassing to bother repairing properly. 3 months after the battle, I stood once again on the observation deck, looking out at the trading station that had witnessed the entire transformation of our ship, from mocked wreck to something the rest of the galaxy now spoke about with careful, uncertain respect. A diplomatic shuttle had docked earlier that day, carrying a delegation from the very same Korath Dominion whose fleet we had defeated months earlier. Among them, I recognized the same pale gray-skinned officer who had once toured our entrance bay with such obvious contempt, running his gloved hand along mismatched plating and calling our efforts an embarrassment. This time, he did not laugh at all. He stood quietly beside the rest of his delegation, studying the ship's exterior with an expression I could not quite read, though it bore no resemblance whatsoever to the dismissive amusement I remembered from our first meeting. Elena Voss met the delegation personally at the main airlock, and I watched from a distance as she extended a formal, professional greeting to officers who had once considered our entire project unworthy of serious attention. There was no gloating in her posture, no obvious satisfaction at their reversal of opinion. She simply treated them as equals, which was, I realized, its own kind of quiet victory. That evening, after the delegation had departed and the ship had settled back into its usual routine, I found myself once more on the bridge, standing beside Elena at the same viewport where we had shared so many quiet conversations throughout the long months of construction. The stars outside looked exactly the same as they always had, distant and indifferent to everything that had happened aboard this small, stubborn ship. The delegation asked about renaming the vessel, Elena said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. Apparently our old designation carries too much history now. Too much weight. What did you tell them? I asked. That the crew would decide, she said, glancing sideways at me with the faintest hint of a smile. Any suggestions? I thought about it for a long moment, remembering every version of this ship I had known since the day I first boarded her. The broken, mocked wreck, drifting quietly in the dark, photographed by tourists as a symbol of failure. The half-rebuilt project, bristling with mismatched plating and strange, ugly weapon systems that followed none of the elegant rules the rest of the galaxy respected. The ship that had fought and won against overwhelming odds, using nothing but stubbornness, ingenuity, and a willingness to break every convention anyone had ever expected us to follow. They already gave her a name, I said. We just never bothered to argue with it. Elena raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to continue. The Beast, I said. That is what their own officers called her, after the battle. It was meant as an insult at first, something monstrous, something that did not belong among proper, civilized warships. And now, Elena asked. Now it just sounds true, I said. Nothing more, nothing less. Elena Voss turned back toward the viewport, considering the idea in silence for a long moment before finally nodding slowly to herself. The Beast, she repeated quietly, as if testing the weight of the name against everything the ship had become. I think that suits her perfectly. In the months that followed, official records across Earth Command formally adopted the name, and it spread quickly across the rest of known space, carried by traders, diplomats, and military officers alike, until very few people in the galaxy remembered the ship's original, forgotten designation at all. The Beast became more than a single vessel. She became the foundation of an entirely new class of ship, a symbol of what humanity could build when pushed past every reasonable expectation, when every advantage was stripped away and only stubbornness, ingenuity, and quiet determination remained. I often thought back to that very first night aboard the ship, watching a Korath patrol cruiser sweep its lights across our broken hull like a spotlight on something pathetic and forgotten. I thought about the fear I had felt then, the humiliation of being part of a project everyone assumed was already doomed to fail. None of us had known, on that first night, exactly what we were about to build together out of scrap metal, stubborn hope, and countless sleepless nights. They had mocked us for being broken. They had laughed at mismatched plating and outdated systems, certain that a ship built from failure could only ever remain a failure. What none of them understood, what none of them could have possibly predicted, was that being broken had never actually been our weakness at all. It had simply given us room to become something they never expected, something that did not follow their rules. Something that, in the end, they were forced to respect, whether they wanted to or not. The Beast still flies today, scarred and mismatched as ever, patrolling the same quiet corner of space where she was once considered nothing more than an embarrassing wreck. And every time a new ship passes close enough to read the old, battle-worn plating along her hull, I like to imagine they remember exactly what that name means now, and exactly what happens when you underestimate something the galaxy once tried so hard to forget.